The first time I had a grown man burst into tears at the end of a Social Security disability exam, I had no idea what to do. I'm going to talk about that today. Hello, I'm John Foster, and I'm a medical doctor who does Social Security disability exams. And today I'm going to give you the first part of a two-part series about the emotional roller coaster of Social Security disability exams. As usual, everything I say reflects my own opinions based on my own experience and study, and not the opinions of the Social Security Administration or any other medical body. Now, in my previous videos, I've mentioned that disabled patients are sad and functional patients are mad, but the terms sad and mad don't really reflect what I see in disability exams. What I see frequently is despair and rage. And today I'm going to talk about despair and disability. Two concepts from psychiatry are important. The first I learned when I began my experience with psychiatry in medical school in the 1970s, and that's that people grieve most the loss of what they value most. And that applies to disability, because in disability, the person loses the ability to perform bodily functions. In a person who's spent their life doing hard physical labor, the loss of musculoskeletal ability will be grieved greatly. Conversely, a person who does thinking work will grieve the loss of the ability to think or remember the greatest. The second is a concept I learned only in recent years from Dr. Jordan Peterson, that when a patient complains of depression, you need to sort out whether they have an endogenous depression, a depression that's not due to outside factors or losses and is an actual psychiatric illness, or if the cause of their depression is that they have a bad life, because the treatment of the two different types of sadness is different. Well, everybody who's physically disabled has, to some degree, a bad life. They're no longer able to do things that once they could do with ease. They may also be in a state of chronic pain or other physical discomfort, such as shortness of breath or vertigo. Not only that, but disability and the loss of the ability to work often compounds problems. People no longer have enough money. They often lose their health insurance and, despite being sick or injured, cannot access adequate medical care. Some of them even become homeless. Many can't afford the medication that would help their condition. I've had more than one patient tell me that their spouse either divorced them or was considering divorcing them due to their disability. These are real, reality-based problems, not psychogenically manufactured problems. So what do I see during disability exams? Well, usually disabled patients hold it together until the end of the exam, and that's where many of them lose it and have an emotional outburst. And surprisingly enough, I see this most commonly in what you would consider to be tough guys. These are men who've done hard physical labor all their life and are proud of it. They've seen themselves as the provider for their family. Their identity is based on their work. Now, I do see the same reaction sometimes in women or in men who do mental work rather than physical work, but it's by far the most common in men who are used to doing hard physical work. And they tend to feel ashamed. They feel that they've become weak and useless to themselves and to their families. Many of them seem to enter into a downward spiral where they obsess over the things they can no longer do, get sadder and more depressed, and obsess even more over the things they cannot do and no longer have. And to make things worse, they often think that they're losing their mind. They aren't psychologically oriented, and they've never had a psychological problem in their life, and now they do. Some of them even think they're going insane. Over and over, at the end of the exam, they tell me they would give anything to be able to work again. Although most present as sad, it is possible for them to present as mad. I recently had a man, one of the tough guy group, who from the minute I introduced myself seemed extremely disagreeable, and I couldn't figure out why. I'd only told him my name, that we were going to do an exam that would go to Social Security, that I didn't make the final decision on his claim, and it wasn't an exam to treat you. Pretty bland statements. Well, this anger may be inward anger directed outwards. At the end of the exam, the man burst into tears, and it turned out that he was feeling worthless and hopeless. That caused feelings of anger that in his case were directed outwards. He wasn't really mad at me. He was mad and frustrated at his disease and at himself. As I mentioned in the beginning, when I first started to experience these emotional outbursts, I had no preparation and no idea what to do. I only have about 5 to 10 minutes to talk to these folks at the end of the exam, and I certainly didn't want to kick them out in their extremely emotional state. That just seemed too heartless to me. I've tried several different things to see if I could help, and I've also discussed this with a friend who's a psychotherapist, and I think I've come up with some helpful techniques. So the first thing is make sure you have a box of Kleenex in the exam room because you're going to need it. And no man wants to walk out of the exam room with tears streaming down his cheeks. The second thing to do is in any extremely sad or depressed patient, consider suicidality. And the best thing to do is ask the patient honestly, are they thinking of hurting themselves or attempting suicide? Don't beat around the bush. Ask a direct question. It's been proven time and again that patients will tend not to volunteer suicidality on a doctor's visit, but if they are suicidal and they're asked directly, they will answer honestly and talk about it. I haven't had a seriously suicidal patient yet, but I suspect it's only a matter of time until I do. The next thing I do is to assure the patient that what they're going through and their emotions and tears are normal. I tell them that I see this sort of reaction over and over again in disability exams. There's nothing wrong with the patient. I explain that they've lost part of themselves and it's necessary to grieve it. There are only 2 circumstances in the tough guy world where it's considered all right for a man to cry. These are the loss of a child or the loss of a canine companion, a pet dog. I'm by no means a tough guy myself, but I have had a certain exposure to the world through my experiences as a ringside doctor for professional and amateur fighting sports, mostly mixed martial arts, but also boxing and kickboxing. I tell these people that it's as if your dog died. You would grieve that. You're grieving your disability, your loss of function. If it's a man, I mention specifically that I see a lot of tough guys react this way. And I give a real example from a patient I saw last year, a career Marine who developed severe arthritis and basically couldn't do any difficult physical activity. He burst into tears at the end of the exam and discussed his feelings of worthlessness and his inability to provide for his family. I tell the patients that they are normal. They are not mentally ill. There are two other situations where I've seen people worrying that they're going insane, where a simple reassurance that what they're experiencing is normal is sometimes a tremendous relief for them. The first is people who've been married for a long time and their spouse dies. In such a situation, it's normal for the surviving spouse to hear the voice of the deceased spouse when they're home alone. And this can go on for a year or even longer. These people have lost a spouse, and now most of them feel they're losing their mind as well. I've had people burst into tears of relief when I tell them that this is normal and happens to most people who've lost a life partner. The other situation is in people who've been through an auto accident where they are injured. Many of these people have severe anxiety related to the accident and often will not drive in the same location where the accident happened, or may become paranoid in situations reminiscent of the accident. For example, if they were rear-ended, they may develop severe anxiety if someone's tailgating them. These patients as well often feel that they're losing their mind and can be greatly relieved by simply explaining that this is a normal phenomenon that most people who've been in a serious auto accident experience. What I learned to say is that an accident isn't just trauma to the body, it's trauma to the mind as well, and it takes time for the mind to heal. And usually the mind heals about as fast as the body does. Although in a few circumstances, I've had to refer patients for therapy where they were simply unable to drive due to anxiety for months after their wreck. So to summarize, disability involves a loss of part of the self. The patients experience a grief process and may become obsessed with their loss. Patients tend to grieve the most the loss of what they value the most. I tend to see the worst grief reactions in blue-collar men who've done hard physical labor. One more thing that some of these folks have found helpful. I explained the downward spiral many people get into, where they obsess about what they've lost, become more depressed, and obsess more and withdraw from their family and friends. I tell them they can still see, hear, move whatever extremities they can, speak, think, and many other activities which I see patients unable to do in disability exams. I tell them sometimes it helps to focus on what they still can do instead of what they cannot do. Also, when it comes to children or grandchildren, these people often feel useless. They will say things like, I can no longer play baseball with my children because of my arthritis, and I feel worthless. I tell them one thing they can definitely do that will help their children is show them how a person can deal with adversity, because their children are guaranteed to experience adversity in their life. And if their father or mother can show them how to deal well with adversity, that will be an invaluable lesson for the children. Well, that's all my talk about despair. Next week, I'm going to talk about rage, and that will be interesting. Well, I hope this has been helpful, and as always, remember, if it happens, it's possible.